The manufacturers are never going to compare their cars. They don't like their cars being compared. They would just be content to sit back and say, we have to meet a government standard, we're all meeting the government standard. This is the government's crash test.
For more than 20 years, the government has been crashing cars like this, straight on into a wall, a good way to test airbags and seat belts.
You see the bags working very well, the dummies, the movement is well controlled.
This car passes the government test.
Passes it with flying colors.
The problem, O'Neill says, more than half of all real-world crashes don't happen that way. Walk through any junkyard and you'll see cars that hit off-center. And if you test that way, like the Institute is doing, in a way the government doesn't, the results can be alarmingly different.
The car companies have also criticized the Insurance Institute, saying it has a vested interest and cares more about cutting insurance claims than the added cost of building safer cars, that it puts too much emphasis on this one crash test. But most of all, the automakers said the Institute's test was too fast.
I would have to classify it as a ultra-high-speed test compared to the types of crashes that happen in the real world.
George Parker represents the International Association of Automobile Manufacturers.
Are you saying that people don't have accidents at 40 miles an hour?
There are very rare instances of crashes at that speed.
The Institute says it picked the 40-mile-an-hour speed because among fatal front-end accidents, that speed is common. About half of deaths happen faster and half slower than 40. Automakers question whether the insurance industry should be doing testing at all, charging it's really concerned about reducing claims regardless of what it adds to the cost of a new car. Brian O'Neill heads up the Insurance Institute.
The manufacturers are never going to compare their cars. They don't like their cars being compared. They would just be content to sit back and say, we have to meet a government standard, we're all meeting the government standard.
We asked the government's top auto safety official that last year.
We applaud the Insurance Institute for doing this sort of test. We think it's an important test. We just don't have the money right now to do that.
In the offset collision.
And it's not just the Institute that is concerned. One of the world's most respected automakers has been warning for years that without offset testing, the government's program is flawed. Tom Beloga is a safety engineer for Mercedes-Benz.
In an offset impact, you would have much more movement rearward because you're doubling the crash energy on the side of the vehicle that's impacted. And that was jamming rearward and causing injuries.
But the government doesn't require offset crashes, so up until now, consumers had no way of knowing which cars will put you in that kind of crash. The Insurance Institute is starting to change that. Dateline was invited to watch the first ever set of comparative offset crash tests.
The new side crash test. They think it reflects the reality of today's roads better than the government's test, which every vehicle must pass to be sold in the United States.
This is the government's barrier. It represents the front end of a car. It was designed in the early 1980s. In contrast, we've chosen a barrier to represent vehicles that are very common in today's fleets, SUVs and pickup trucks, taller, higher, and contoured.
And another difference, the government uses a tall, heavy man in its test. The Institute puts a small woman or teenager in the front and rear seats.
It all adds up to a difficult test.
If companies were to start to design cars to pass your test rather than the government's test, would that make cars less safe in a strictly head-on collision?
Not necessarily so, but it would be a mistake if they did that. They should be designing their cars to do well in both tests. This is the Ford Escape.
The Escape does offer optional side impact airbags, but this one does not have them. The Escape gets a pour, another potential death.
The Institute tests cars only with their standard equipment, and just 5 of these small cars come with standard side airbags. The rest make side airbags available as a $400 to $700 option.
Why can't all car makers do it?
They can, and they should, and they will.